Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Unlocking Security, the Power of Passkeys on the Path to Passwordless. Next slide, please. I am very grateful to be hosting today's meeting. My name is Bob Long. I am our president of our Americas business here at Dayon. And joining me today, I have two great guests, which I am pleased to be introducing next. The first I would like to introduce is Megan Seamus. Megan is a member of and head of marketing of the FIDO Alliance. She's a multi-stakeholder organizational standardizing leader for stronger authentication and to reduce global password usage and create a more secure web experience for users out in today's environments. In this role, she leads all global communications and marketing education initiatives around FIDO and FIDO authentication and passkeys. And Megan really has a deep, if you will, a deep expertise and passion around introducing and gaining broad adoption of new standards and techniques. So having spent the last 20 years leading education, marketing, and branding for several global multi-stakeholder standards organizations. So with that, please go to the next slide. As well as I have the next stakeholder I have would be Carolyn Manis Sorensen. Carolyn is an independent consultant in the digital identity and access management space with a background in customer protection from her career at Fidelity Investments. Her roles have focused on architecture, product strategy for identity, authentication, and fraud prevention across the broad scope of customer types, including retail brokerage, let's see here, workplace benefits, and certainly institutional investors. At the industry level, she has been part of the FIDO Alliance for quite some time, eFraud, Global Forum, Better Identity Coalition, pardon me, and different groups promoting better technology solutions and partnerships for protecting customers in the digital channels. From an administrative perspective today, please put all your questions into the chat channel. Pretty much status quo for many of you that have attended many webinars, but we'll be tracking those and making sure that we get those questions answered as part of today's session. And if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, please. Next slide, please. At Dayon, just a quick overview, right? We believe in bringing the human back into identity transactions. And as I think about that, right, we have focused in on developing technology to protect businesses, their customers, their data from different identity fraud. And as I think about it in terms of our 24-year-old company, we truly see the need for identity requirements changing on a crazy frequent basis these days, particularly around AI and deep fakes and other types of requirements for our clients. And then I think about it in terms of a product market fit, right? The efforts with the FIDO Alliance and now Passkey integration and utilization of Passkeys globally continue to be top of mind for many of our clients, as well as I'm sure many others in the marketplace. So today, I am pleased to, if you don't mind going to the next slide, pleased to get things going as I think about it in terms of the overall global identity scheme for how we're looking at the marketplace. And as I think about it in terms of that product market fit, regardless of the industry, regardless of our different markets regionally around the planet, we're continuing to see a need for passkeys, integration with FIDO techniques, and certainly our alliance with the association, gosh, since the early days. I'm very pleased to be hosting today's call. And with that, let's move into the focus for today's discussion. And with that, as I mentioned, Megan, very pleased to have you on board today. Thank you very much for speaking. And with that, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks for having me, and to the team at Dayon for having me, and to our attendees. I'm happy to be here today, talk to you a little bit about passkeys, what they are, why we feel they're needed, and how you should be thinking about them for your own organization. Okay, I think I have control. Just give me one moment. Well, I'll just have you move me to the next slide if you don't mind. So I just want to level set a little bit about what the FIDO Alliance is and why we have moved our focus to passkeys and what the heck is a passkey, okay? So the FIDO Alliance has been around since 2013. We have a very specific mission, which is to gain adoption of open standards for simpler, stronger authentication so we can reduce our entire globe's reliance on passwords and phishable forms of authentication. We've seen over the years that phishing really is the main driver for account takeovers and gaining access to folks' credentials. And for us, training away a phishing problem is just not something that we see as viable. So instead, we focused on unphishable authentication, which is leveraging public key cryptography in order to get shared secrets off of open servers where they're vulnerable. With FIDO, the private keys stay on the device and they're bound to the domain of a website. So even if a person wanted to, they simply cannot give that secret away, even if they fall victim to a phishing attack or some kind of like spoofed login site. The FIDO will literally not let the person give away that secret. So that has always been our core mission, always been what we've been trying to do. And we really saw a lot of really great uptake with our initial specifications and approach. But what we also have seen is that, and I just want to be clear about what our initial premise was, is that the private key would live on and would never leave a person's device. So remember that, stay on and never leave a person's device. But over time, what we saw was that this requirement was actually hurting scale for us, especially on the consumer side. So think about it like this. You have, most people have 2 or 3 devices, of course. You sign up for FIDO on your laptop on, xyzbank.com, and you're great. You're signing in with your fingerprint or your face or local PIN, and it's phishing resistant. But then you go to your phone, and there's no FIDO there. You don't have access to FIDO there. You'd either have to you'd have to enroll on that device. Now, what happens if you lose a device? Well, then you go to that service on the new device, and how are you getting into that service? Probably with a password, right? And so this was sort of the thing we started thinking about. And if we can go to the next slide, we've been focusing on positioning FIDO as a great MFA option. But what was happening is that our primary factor has still been passwords even till today. And we've been talking about this problem for so long that we lost a little bit of sight over the fact that we were not combating the primary issue, which is the primary factor being passwords. And to be totally transparent, MFA adoption is not something that consumers love to opt into, and opt-in rates are typically low, really because it is a hassle for folks, whether it's to get another code. I mean, I think we all know that, when you're trying to sign into any kind of service and you have to go to another screen and you might not have, it's just a sort of a hassle. And so this issue of having the primary factor still being password has really been an issue for us to try to meet our mission. And if we go to the next slide, just to make the point, of course, we've had 2FA, MFA, whatever you want to call it, options for so long that have been sort of a Band-Aid on top of the primary factor problem that we have. But what we've done is sort of layer phishable methods on top of a phishable first factor. And that really has been something that have served us pretty well. But again, as Bob mentioned, with things like generative AI, these kinds of threats and phishing is only becoming much easier for cyber criminals to perpetuate in a better way. You're not getting a badly worded email anymore. You're getting very well constructed social engineering messages across all of your channels, probably SMS, probably email, probably WhatsApp, any kind of, probably your social websites. anywhere that they can do it, they're doing it. It's easy and cheap for them to do that. And so again, what we see is this need to go to the, if we go to the next slide, what we thought as an alliance, 250 members strong, is we need to do something about this first factor problem. And what if we could rethink the way we think about authentication entirely and say, let's get rid of this flawed factor and putting stuff on top of it. And we actually replace it with a single factor that's more secure and easier to use. That single phishing resistant primary factor is better than putting a phishable factor on top of a phishable factor. And if we go to the next slide, that is where this idea of passkeys has come in. So passkeys are simply, and so this is why I said, remember what I said before. It's really us adding the capability for the FIDO credential to be synced and accessed across a user's device. So it's no longer required that the private key must stay on the device and never leave the device. Now there's an option, a new capability for a FIDO credential to be synced across a secure cloud. So that is an added capability. So when we say passkey, passkeys are simply passwordless FIDO credentials. It is a more consumer-friendly way for us to bring this type of authentication at scale. So passkeys are really our consumerization of FIDO authentication. And to dig a little deeper, if we go to the next slide, to just on this newer terminology, we understand there's a little bit, there can be some confusion. We're kind of like changing things a little, we've changed things a little bit. It's any passwordless FIDO credential. It is commonly synchronized across a user's device, but again, it does not have to be synchronized. The use case of having a private key bound to a device is still a viable option. Leveraging FIDO security keys is still an option. This is really an extension of FIDO authentication and new capability. And then this term of a passkey provider. So think about the way that we manage passkeys the same way as we would manage passwords in a password manager. So passkey providers could be a platform operating system, browser password manager provider like like iCloud Keychain, Google Password Manager, or it could be a third-party software credential provider like we would typically use with a password manager like Dashlane and 1Password. The ones that I mentioned are actually live passkey providers today. So that is how a user can access their passkeys across devices, is leveraging one of these OS or third-party vendors. We're also working on the options, the portability of keys. So like if you wanted to change a provider, we're working on specifications to enable that in a very secure way. So not to lock anybody into a certain OS or certain password manager. So just if we move on, so I just want to be very, again, if you can give it a click. So device-bound passkeys is a term that you will hear. And that is again, a private key that doesn't leave the device, and that is typically can be housed on a FIDO security key, for example. You can click on that, yeah. And then you have the synced passkeys. Actually, go back, sorry. And then you have synced passkeys, which are able to be accessed across all the user's device. The piece that I really wanted to make clear is that whether device bound or synced, passkeys are fundamentally more secure and easier to use than passwords and legacy forms of MFA like SMS OTPs. I'm not going to walk through the entire flow of how FIDO works. We did talk about how it's based on public key cryptography. Shared secrets are not, there's no sharing of secrets from the user to the device. I'm sorry, to the server, and we can move on to the one that you have, and then you can click it again. But it's also important to note, because I still get this question a lot, this area of the user verification typically will involve a biometric of some kind or a local PIN. That interaction is between the user and the authenticator. That biometric data does not go to the server, to the service. That's something that we find consumers really need to be reminded of if they're skeptical about leveraging biometrics to sign in. But the real point of this slide that I want to get across is that our approach to authentication has not changed. We've simply added the new capability of allowing the private key to be synchronized across devices via the cloud. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. So this is on the consumer side, the uptake. It's been 2 years only since we announced this new capability and announced Passkeys. And the uptake, especially on the consumer side, has been nothing short of tremendous. And in fact, I had several of the folks that are listed here say to me, this is what we've been waiting for. Thank you, because this is a no-brainer for us, because this is a way for us to get on, a very secure way to sign in into the hands of our users, which doesn't really require them to do all these extra steps. It's actually easier for them. And if we go to the next slide, actually it's probably the slide after this, but if we, so this is a slide. What we're actually seeing, and you can just build this all out because I'll just talk to it at a pretty high level, and I'll name a couple of these. What we're actually seeing is that the security of FIDO and the security of Passkeys is sort of table stakes at this point. We know FIDO is phishing resistant, but what we didn't know, or we didn't know as well as we know now because of this data that's coming in from these service providers, is that this is actually a way to turn your sign-in screen into a profit center. What I'm saying is you have better login success, you have faster sign-ins, you have less abandonment. And what that means is you are increasing revenues, especially if you are a service provider like a Macquarie or Air New Zealand that is processing transactions. Air New Zealand actually said our sales went up, period. And that is a huge way to not only is that just great for the business, but if you are a service provider and you're having some internal issues of selling why Passkeys within your organization, it's not just about security. Security is it's phishing resistant. You just get that. But what if you could actually improve sign-in rates? What if you actually could improve sign-in success and decrease abandonment? Those are real dollars and cents that you can look at, on a yearly basis. And even taking away the reduction in the cost of SMS OTP, which is, actually huge for a lot of organizations as well. So it's been great. And what's also great is that these folks that have given us this data are excited. They're excited. They want to report this data. They're so excited about the results that they're seeing. So moving on to the next slide, I think, so I want to give a couple of takeaways and then we'll turn things over to Carolyn, but understanding that these are expanded capabilities that we now have. So we see FIDO as being able to address all kinds of use cases, whether it's regulated, enterprise, or consumer. And this expanded scope with Passkeys has really helped to scale on the consumer side, as you've seen with the previous slide with all of those logos. So if you were to take away, we can move on to the next slide. If we want to take away some just really high-level things about Passkeys, if you're in a use case on the consumer side or enterprise side where your users are using passwords and only passwords, use Passkeys. Passkeys are phishing resistant. Passkeys are better. The next takeaway on the next slide is that we really want to think about changing how we talk about authentication. This idea of MFA, which is just multiple factors, is not sufficient when you have a phishing resistant first factor. So if you have what you have with Passkeys, right? So think about phishing resistant rather than factors. A safe passkey is always going to be better than a password. And I'd argue a sync passkey is going to be better than a password plus an SMS OTP as well, because those are two phishable factors. And so if we move to the next slide, understanding there are business requirements that you have auditors in your organization that are like, what is this? You have regulatory requirements, you have your own security requirements, and it's not a one size fits all. This is why we have this expanded, these expanded capabilities. So you can, if you have a phishing resistant first factor, and you could put another factor on top of that in order to be assured of, that person's possession of a device, for example. You can leverage other risk signals on a device in order to be, have higher assurance of, who it is that's signing in. Or of course, you can require a device-bound passkey. And you can also mix and match within an organization. If we're talking about on the enterprise side, you can have very privileged users have to use device-bound passkeys. Maybe you have other less privileged users that can that are just using passwords, and a sync passkey would make sense. The point is really that FIDO now addresses all of these requirements, and you can sort of mix and match in the way that best works for you. So in conclusion, my next slide, use passkeys. And I'm going to hand things over to Carolyn, but I'll be here for questions if anyone has them later.
Thank you, Megan. Really appreciate it. And greetings, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Carolyn Manna-Sorensen. I work with the DAON team in particular around representing the end user and the perspective of implementers in product strategy and development. So kind of building on what Megan already introduced, I wanted to talk a little bit about listening to implementers, talking to them about wanting to get to a fully passwordless experience using passkeys as a cornerstone. What might be some of the challenges that are stopping them from getting to that implementation? What are their questions and concerns? And can we build a strategy around how to address that in a practical implementation? And then we'll end, hopefully we'll have a little bit of time at the end for a very quick demo of utilizing passkeys and utilizing a step-up authentication on DAON's new XAuth Web SDK that kind of simplifies a lot of the processes we've just been talking about around building a full passwordless ecosystem anchored on passkeys as a primary authenticator. To start off, before we jump into the questions, I did want to just mention the resonance of the passkey value add is really there. FIDO addresses fraud prevention and protecting customers. It addresses customer experience and bringing better customer experiences to keep them engaged. And it addresses, reducing errors and addressing customer support costs. And all of those really resonate with these implementers. Many of them already use FIDO in their mobile apps, so they have seen what solving login friction can really do in that channel and would love to see it applied in the web channel as well. Okay, so jumping into the questions. How do we avoid confusing the end users with new unfamiliar experiences? And especially in established implementations, established industries, that can be a challenge in just making sure that people don't feel nervous because what they're used to seeing is changing a little bit. And I would really recommend taking a look at the FIDO Alliance's user experience research. They've done a great job looking at how to present it, how to word things to explain what passkeys are to end users. So take advantage of that. And peace of mind can come from having a more consistent implementation so that when people are using passkeys in different scenarios, they have the same wording, they have the same experience, so it becomes more familiar and more trusted. And certainly the OS implementers, so Apple and Google and on Android, they're building very intuitive and familiar experiences. And that's always been one of the highlights of FIDO, is that it's personalized to the device that your user is on. All right, next question. Big one that comes up is, how do we manage this risk around unauthorized sync devices? And you've heard the trope probably of the parent that comes home to see the life-size panda delivered from Amazon that their kid ordered through the Alexa, or thousands of dollars in Roblox in-app purchases. So we know that there is some risk around unauthorized sync devices, even though the syncing solves the crux of the problem around enrollment and recovery. So we see the value of it, but how do we manage it, especially in regulatory or regulated industries? There are multiple strategies around it. You may already have device fingerprinting as part of your authentication space, So that can help provide additional context about, is this passkey coming from a device that's already trusted, or is it something that we need to maybe look at additional authentication factors around, or step up in that case. So Dan has also been looking at utilizing, like Megan was talking about, device-specific passkeys and combining this together in one offering so that as an implementer, you can get the benefit of the syncing as well as the specificity of a device level key. All right, this feeds in right into the next one of, how do we manage this dependency on cloud account providers? So especially, again, back to financial services, healthcare, places where the level of assurance and having more context to make good risk decisions is really important. So just as Megan was mentioning, we may need to look at supporting additional factors for step-up authentication. And that doesn't mean falling back to a password. That can mean incorporating additional passwordless factors to make sure the level of assurance is appropriate for what your end users want to do. So I would say you have a pattern of, looking at detecting trusted devices, making risk decisions, and then orchestrating potential step up. If you've got continuous authentication, you may only do that when it's a sensitive transaction. All right, the next one. So we've talked about user experiences, we talked about managing the synced keys. We do have to talk about the fact that older systems may not support passkeys, and they may not even have Bluetooth available so that you could do a cross-platform authentication. So that, we always have to kind of have that, let's try something else, or what can we fall back to? And again, these don't have to go back to a password authentication. There are multiple passwordless experiences that can be built where with mobile push or a QR code, you can leverage a more sophisticated device to secure that additional channel. One-time passcodes or even server-side biometrics can continue to support a truly passwordless experience for these edge cases. All right, last question that we wanted to talk about, transaction signing. So from our partners in the EU, there may be transaction signing for PSD2 or the Payments Directive compliance needed for non-repudiation. And in those cases, just as Megan was talking about, you do have the ability to generate device level keys that can be used for transaction signing. Dan has added this to the XAuth Web SDK to make it a little bit easier to combine passkeys with the device specific transactions like transaction signing. All right, so that kind of wraps up some of those concerns around what are the practical implications in building a passwordless experience. I hope your takeaway from that is, yes, there are concerns, there are things to deal with, especially if you're in a highly regulated environment, but there are strategies to deal with it and teams that are ready to take that on. So if we have time for just a very quick demo, what we'll see is a passkey enrollment, a seamless authentication on that same device, and then showing the sync to a new device, but a step up required because it is untrusted and hasn't used that passkey before. Again, this is a little bit of a demo that's by engineers for engineers. So it isn't embracing all of the FIDO UX, but hopefully gives you a demo of what it can look like and what capabilities you can use. So device one is a Mac laptop using Safari browser. So you have an authenticated end user who's going to go ahead and set up a passkey to register with this trusted identity. So you see it uses the native OS interaction, in this case Touch ID on the Mac laptop. And now we've associated this authenticated user with their passkey. So if we log out now and authenticate on the same device, you get a completely seamless experience that utilizes the native authentication to sign in. No step up needed because this is a trusted device. So now we'll look at, in the same cloud account or cloud ID, we're going to have an additional device. So this is an iPhone running a Safari browser. You'll see how the sync happens for a seamless passkey authentication, and then we have a step up using face authentication. So, all right, authentication uses Face ID because that's appropriate for this device. And now we will use a step up for additional assurance. And this is just leveraging a server-side biometric to do the step up, I think. That should be the flow. I don't know, Ruth, if it got stuck.
Yes, it did. I'll try
All
again.
right, sorry about that. But based on detecting the trusted device, making a risk decision, such as a higher risk or higher consequence transaction, you would then want to step up with an additional authenticator that is registered for this person, and ideally something that's also a passwordless experience. All right, it may not be.
We will include the full video on the recording. I think it's just a Wi-Fi issue with me.
No worries. So just in conclusion, hopefully this is giving you some ideas around managing passkeys in that overall ecosystem, using them as a cornerstone for addressing those key issues of fraud prevention, great customer experiences, and reducing overall errors and customer support. So thanks for your time today. I'll hand it to Bob.
Yeah, thank you, Carolyn, and thank you both. Excellent job in presenting. It looks like I have 3 questions. Megan, why don't we have you answer this first one? How does the FIDO Alliance work with organizations to ensure compatibility and interoperability of passkey technology across different platforms?
Okay, I think the question, the platforms in question are like the operating systems, like the
Most likely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, so all the passkey providers that I mentioned in my slide earlier, which includes the operating systems as well as the third-party passkey providers, are all part of the FIDO Alliance, and in fact, they have a special interest group where they're working together to enable things like portability of keys. For example, from a technical perspective. Also from a technical perspective, the specs are all the same, so they're all supporting, WebAuthn is the spec. So there's not really an interoperability issue with the way that passkeys are managed. It's really the same spec that we've always leveraged, which is with the W3C, which is WebAuthn, or FIDO2, as many of you would know it. But I think part of the question might be about consistency of how the user experiences their passkeys across those operating systems and passkey providers is another sort of piece to that we work on as well. We have a UX working group that does a lot of research with consumers to understand, how they're looking at these flows in terms of the differences between some of the operating systems and some issues that they may encounter. And then there's the implementers who sometimes encounter different little issues with the different operating systems or passkey providers as well. So what we do is we take in that input and we give it back to those folks, and we've seen they're very willing to make changes based on common issues that they're seeing. We also can connect folks directly to the platforms in order to talk to them directly about their own implementations and what they would like to see. So there's a really high level of collaboration that includes Apple, Google, Microsoft, and the passkey providers that I mentioned, as well as folks like implementers and solutions providers like Dayon, all kind of working together at the same table to figure out how to make this work best for everyone so that we can achieve our mission. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, no, I think you did an excellent job in outlining some of the framework of different working groups and plenary actions and other things too as part of the response. And I guess kind of along the same vein, a second question has come in, and maybe I'll have you. I think you kind of actually answered part of this in your prior response, but maybe you can, and Carolyn, maybe you can kind of piggyback on or contribute to a secondary response here. But the question is, what are the recommended methods for migrating existing users from password-based systems to passkey-based authentication? Hopefully that came through okay. Did you hear me okay on that? I have a little feedback in my ear at the moment. Okay. So the question again, what are the recommended methods for migrating existing users from password-based systems to passkey-based authentication? So I'm not sure who wants to take the lead on that one, but I think part of the...
I can answer it a little bit and let Carolyn talk about what she's seen as well. So from a consumer perspective, so moving consumer users is a little different than employees, obviously, because they're going to be dictated to do it probably. But for consumers, we have seen, and this is in our UX guidelines, which are available on our website. When we did our research, we actually found that folks respond better to enrolling in Passkeys when doing account-related tasks, not sign-in related tasks. So if someone's trying to sign in to their bank to get something done, they really don't want to be bothered by some kind of pop-up that's like, do this. They're like, no, I'm trying to just do my thing. However, if you introduce it at times when they're experiencing pain with passwords, such as during account recovery or in the account settings, or sort of areas where they're going to be doing those account-related tasks, that's much more successful. And what we've seen is that some of the relying parties or service providers that I showed that have done this have started there, and then some of them have then, based on their numbers, have moved into actually being a little bit more, doing a little bit more in terms of doing some of that asking during the session. But for us, what we've seen is the account related task is the best way to get folks started.
Yeah, I would echo that as well. And I think you know, with any new implementation, you start small, you start with willing participants. For example, your own employees that are also your customers can be willing participants in trying this out and giving feedback and working through the user design. And also say, you know, many already have a security profile or a dashboard. That can be a great place to introduce it, so that, again, voluntarily people can sign up and experience that new authenticator. And then if you have the personalization capabilities, like, you know, in a certain segment of your population, you might be able to introduce ideas or A/B testing for how to present it in an appealing way. I think, again, yeah, take advantage of the user design and the research that's been done by the FIDO Alliance and use that for helping, you know, kickstart that and figure out some of the best wording that really resonates with customers.
All right, thank you both. And the third question, what would a webinar be without a compliance-related question? I know our favorites. So starting off with Carolyn this time, I'll put you onto the hot seat. So Megan's done a nice job of fielding the first two. How do you address user concerns around data privacy in the use of passkeys?
So I would say FIDO has always been focused specifically on avoiding capturing any personal data, secrets. You know, that's been a cornerstone from day one of how to protect customers better, is by not having any of their data. So that helps a lot with privacy and compliance from day one. In the synced implementations, I know that, you know, Google and Apple have been pretty transparent about how the cloud syncing happens, and that they both employ, you know, zero knowledge strategy. So they don't know anything about what passkeys you've set up, they have no access to the content or the passkeys themselves. They're only ever decrypted on the user's personal device. So, you know, they've built in that protection in the cloud syncing as well. And again, just from a messaging perspective, I think FIDO Alliance has done a good job in developing that consistent wording on how to explain passkeys to customers, and keeping that consistent is just really helpful in bringing, you know, a repeatable, familiar experience that people will become more and more trusting. Sometimes a little friction is appropriate, you know, like we showed with the new device, that can help remind users that we take their security very seriously.
Megan, anything you'd like to add?
No, I think that was perfect. That's exactly spot on.
All right. So for our listeners, that is the only 3 questions we have submitted. We'll give it call it another 20 seconds or so for other questions to potentially come in, and then we will adjourn.
Well, thank you once again for getting everyone together, talking about building that passwordless experience and using passkeys as a cornerstone.
Yeah, this has been great for having me, and thanks to everyone who attended.
Yep. Well, with that, thank you, Megan. We appreciate you making time for this audience and for us as well, and certainly appreciate the partnership with the FIDO Alliance for sure. And Carolyn, thank you as always. Very much appreciate your time and expertise in today's conversation as well. So with that, we will adjourn. Thank you all for attending.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.